Because I asked if you did stuff and you said yes. So what's an example that isn't pacing or isn't the grade book? What'd you have?
Change of classroom,
What?
the change of the instructor, substitute is in.
Okay, so there may have been a change of instructor, something to do with that teacher. Okay? And you'd want to be specific, so but you could, if that's your hypothesis, you could verify that really quickly, couldn't you? You just ask, has there been an instructor change? If yes, it may stay on the table. So let's say that it did happen, and you want to prove that it was the instructor. How might you do that? So you have one teacher for a certain period of time, and now another teacher for another period of time. What data would you look at to say it probably was the instructor? For when?
For both times.
Yes.
You have to compare.
So if the grades and stuff started going downhill after the switch, so then you would look at, you verified that hypothesis. Good. What else did somebody have? I said two. I'll come back to, I gave you guys time to think. What did you have? Or you're getting down now here.
Engagement. So a teacher is doing more of a top-is-pop lecture, and there's not opportunity for collaborative learning and things like that.
Yes. So it's the time the teacher is spending and student engagement. Now, if we were here all day to talk about problem solving, I would have many more examples, but I want to communicate one with you. We have one example we use when we work with districts. It's called Happy High School, and it's actually a high school, and it's all the data that we looked at. These data are actually from that school. And so here's what we did with that hypothesis the judges came up with. Building principals go in and do walkthroughs. They do two things in walkthroughs. What amount of time are teachers spending with a particular instructional strategy? And two, student engagement during each of those times. So, in this case, I'm trying to remember the graph. There was explicit instruction, there was reflection, there was guided instruction with teacher support, guided instruction with peer support, and there were two other things. What the teacher spent most of her time with, it was her, most of her time with, was the areas where the kids were least engaged, average 30 to 40%. With guided instruction with teacher support, guided instruction with peer support, engagement was over 70%. So that's how we would get the data to verify that hypothesis. We then pulled the kids together with a focus group and said, what do you like best about this class? When do you feel like you're most engaged? And they came right out and said the same thing the principal saw. And they said, well, the teacher spent, there was 25% of the class for reflection. And this was supposed to be the kids reflecting on the lesson or whatever. The kids said, what about the reflection time? They're like, ditch it. We don't know what reflection means. And we're all sitting there looking at each other, and we're supposed to be reflecting, and it's crazy. We hate reflection. So the kids came right out and said, we'll pay more attention under these conditions. The principal verified it, and those were the amount of times the teacher spent the least amount of time doing. So if your hypothesis was, what Jen's was, that it's the time and activity for the different strategies, and you're doing integrating academic and behavior, you do a walkthrough, you assess the instructional time, and you look at student engagement tied to each type of strategy. It's a simple process, and there's a bunch of assessment tools out there to do walkthroughs that enable you to take data on instructional strategies and student engagement simultaneously. Now you have your answer. So what's the intervention? What would we say to the teacher is a strategy the teacher could use to boost student performance? Based on what I just said. Logical. I mean, there's no rocket science.
Do what they like more.
What?
Do what they like or are.
Yes, spend more time doing stuff that students are engaged in. Ditch the reflection, at least for now. You wouldn't say that as much as you would show the teacher the data and share that with them. So does that make sense? All right. So let me ask you this. How many of you feel like having this kind of conversation when you're addressing a problem, where there's some guidance around instruction, curriculum, environment, and learner, would help your discussions become more focused and potentially more effective. How many of you think this is something you're going to think about trying to find a way to talk about? Yeah? Well, hopefully more of you. Because if you do this process, everything you now do, you're having these conversations. You have data, but this structures it up in a way to make it effective. Okay, so I already talked about the ICE and the L before. This is just what we're talking about, This is an example. This happens to be Raleigh Rural School District. As a school district, they've completely embraced this method because they have lots of kids who are not doing well. And this is their ISO. So what they did was they defined the domain of instruction for them. They defined a bunch of variables that relate to instruction, both group and individuals. And then they defined ways that you can collect data, reviewing data, interviewing teachers and kids, observing or using test data to verify those hypotheses. They're building this every month. Teams keep adding stuff. So it's a guide about what do you want to think about instruction. So let's do this. Think of ISO. Top one, I'll read it to you. You read it. The schedule does not provide time opportunity for practice and instruction necessary to catch up. So it's a time schedule. Is that instruction, curriculum, environment, or learner? Environment. The instructional strategies do not emphasize explicit instructional strategies, content, enhancement routines, sufficient feedback, guided instruction, or differentiation. What is that? I, C, E, or L? Yeah, I. The E shouldn't have popped up, but it did. Expectations at home and school for performance are low. Environment. So I did work at the Virgin Islands for 4 years, helping them do some of this stuff. In the Virgin Islands, boys who do well in school are called women. That's not a positive for them. Because there's a strong ethic there that women go to school, women get skills, and women work. So that the guys don't have to. So think about an environment. Go to the Virgin Islands and see who's working, and you see you sitting on a curb. And so part of the issue is all of the people in our training were professional educators, and they had children. And they said their biggest challenge with their male kids was dealing with this pressure in the environment not to do well. It's huge. So when you look at something about expectations, that environment is often a very important one. Okay, last one. Pacing is too fast, does not provide for sufficient student engagement, materials are not aligned with standards, and instructional sequences are not sufficiently explicit. I, C, E, or L? Yeah, correct. So let's give a flavor for looking at the whys of it. All right, 27 students become off track to the fourth grade. We talked about that. I'm not going to go through. This is just we have worksheets where the team actually completes these things. Here are the hypotheses this team came up with. The difference exists in performance because of excessive absences during math class. These kids are absent a lot. I don't know if any of you came up with that. Another one was because not enough time is allocated for the most effective instructional practices, the one we just discussed. Another one is because students who are failing to complete less than 50% of their homework. In other words, they're not getting enough practice. There were more, but I'm going to show you these. So the review, interview, observe. So excessive absences. What kind of data are we going to collect? Are we going to review stuff? Are we going to interview? Are we going to observe? Or are we going to test? How are we going to get data on absences? Review database, right? Okay. The differences exist because not enough time is allocated for the most effective instructional practices. I'm going to do this first. So here's what the data actually showed. The average rate of attendance for students receiving A through C grades was 96%. The average attendance for students receiving F grades was 94%. Attendance can have nothing to do with it. Ruled out that hypothesis, so we ditch it. Here's the data on the walkthrough I talked to you about a minute ago. 27% independent practice, 24% explicit, guided with teacher support is 13, guided practice with peer support is 6, independent practice, or I've already said it, and then reflection, integration, and extension, or 6%. Guided practice with teacher support is 13, with peers is also 13. So here are the data about student engagement by instructional practice. Just look at it. 86, 89% if it's modeled, guided with teacher, or guided with peer. Everything else is low. 50% of their classwork or homework or less. So we surveyed kids. How often do you not complete your classwork? We already had the data from the grade books. And they said, and when you don't complete it, why don't you complete it? So is this a review, interview, observe, or test? It could be observe, interview or test, depending on how you look at it. How often do you not complete your homework? When you don't complete it, why don't you? So then we went to look at the data. So during the first half of the grading period, the D or F kids, less than 50% of the work was true with all of the D and F kids. Some interventions were done around that. For the second grading period, for the kids who still completed less than half of their work, they got D's and F's. But for kids who completed 80% or more, they moved up an entire letter grade. Does doing your homework improve your performance? Sure. So does that make sense? So the interventions, I integrated the interventions into that. You saw what they were. For Tier 2 and Tier 3, we always keep track of how many minutes a week they get the instruction. Don't have to worry about that now. So now let's talk about, when you have data, how do you know if interventions work? We have rules. And by the way, if you go to either of the websites I gave you, write this down. There is something called G-TIPS. G-TIPS, T-I-P-S. The one that's up there now is G-TIPS-R, revised. It's called Guiding Tools for Instructional Problem Solving. Everything we're talking about right now is expanded in this resource with examples, everything about this. So if you want a document that kind of reflects our entire conversation since lunch and some of the stuff before, and it's down, everything on our sites is downloadable, it's all free. So if you choose to go back and say, we need to look at this problem solving process for how we have our discussions about improving student performance, whether it's whole grade level or an individual kid. You can look at G-TIPS. We have got rules for response to intervention, and then we have rules for what do we do when we say it's positive, questionable, or poor. So I'm going to go through this quickly and then give you some examples for you to make judgments about. Positive, the gap is closing. You're going to have some data in which the kids or the kid achieve the standard. The level of risk lowers over time. So this is what it looks like on the graph. Does that make sense? The yellow line is the aim line. The dotted line is the trend line. After the intervention or the instruction, the kid's closing the gap, right? Say yes? Yes. I need it just so you can see. So this is what an individual kid's graph would look like that have a positive response to intervention. I'll do this in both places. If the intervention had not been modified and we carried this line out, you see that the kid would end up here, not here. So this intervention changed the slope of the line, and the kid was going to hit there. So that's a good response. Questionable response is the rate at which the gap is widening is either slows or it parallels, but it doesn't close. So this is an example. Improvement, but no closure. Here's an example. Improvement, but no closure. So if you look here, in this short period of time, this kid went from 47 to 62 words correct per minute. That is a 33% increase. But the expectation for what the kid is expected to do was growing at a faster rate than the kid's improvement. So that's why we can't just measure improvement. And poor, the gap is widening. And that's a good example. So follow this with me for a second. This kid started out with 18 of something, ended up with a 31 of something after 2.5 months. Is that improvement, yes or no? How much improvement is it roughly? So it's 13 on 18. 13 18 is about a 65-66% improvement. That's huge. Is the kid farther behind now or previously? Now. Yeah, much further behind now. Even though the kid improved by 67%. Because the standard went up by like 300%. So if you thought this was good growth, on the surface it looks it, but that's going to be your reflection in your end of year assessments. So the other thing I didn't address before you asked about iReady is the progress that is being demonstrated on iReady reflecting the progress with which the standard goes up. So without having that comparison, your kids could be progressing really well, but the standard expected this, and the high-stakes assessment measured the gap. Does that make sense? So you always need that other comparison if you want to answer questions like the one that was posed before. So now what do you do? So let's say that these are 3 buildings in a district. 1, 2, and 3. All 3 buildings are dealing with a group of kids or a kid that made positive response to intervention. Make sense? You with me? Every building should then say, what do we do when we have a positive response? Number 1, we continue the intervention until the kid hits the goal. Number 2, we strengthen at the goal. And number 3, we then use gradual release of the support to see if the kid can sustain the performance. Because you don't know if a kid really gets it until you start to withdraw the support. So if you have a district with district guidelines for RTI, every building would make the same decision. If you don't, the conversations can go all over the place. So that's for positive. For questionable, did we get improvement with questionable, yes or no? Yes. We got improvement. So is something about the intervention working? Yes. But is it working as much? No. So first we say, was it implemented as intended? The number 1 reason why supplemental intervention is not implemented as intended is because of attendance. That sheet, that's why we have that sheet. If it is, we increase the intensity of the intervention. More time, narrower focus, and additional instructional strategies. And assess more often, because we're not sure. If we get a positive response to intervention to this, we keep that intensity low. What we don't do is to go from here to a special ed referral. We just don't do that, because we haven't found the answer yet for this kid. This much instruction was helpful. What if we intensify it? And then we'll talk about what is special ed and RTI. If it's poor and it was implemented the way it was supposed to, we ditch it. And we come back to the problem-solving process. We're off the mark, we missed it. we didn't figure this out right. So we don't keep beating a dead horse. There's a wonderful little book out, and maybe you can find it if you're Googling. It's about a horse that dies under a rider, but it's really about school improvement. And it's what do you do when the horse dies? And then there's like 15 pages. And there are things like, well, we create a committee to study dead horses. We develop a form to document that the horse died. We beat the horse. We keep riding the horse as if the horse was alive in hopes that it will come back to life. So you go through that book, it's really cool. And the last page is, or we get a new ride. So this is get a new ride. But don't go through 15 iterations, because in the process, the horse is going to start stinking. So here's the question then. So here's your tabletop activity on all of that. And I'm going to give you a couple extra minutes. What is the status of your school consistently using the problem-solving process to develop, implement, and evaluate instruction? If you're not using it, what are you doing now to do this? How do you do it? What would you like to improve about the implementation of problem-solving that you're doing now? And is this a priority for you? So first, what is the status of whatever you're calling problem-solving, and what are you doing? Would you like to improve it, and does this offer any thoughts about improvement? And how big of a priority is this for you in your school or your district? Go. And I'm going to give you about 2 minutes to talk about each one of these questions. So 6 or 7 minutes.